Well, Hugh, I just want to say thank you for joining me today on this programme. It was very kind of you to spare the time.
It's a great pleasure to be here.
As a competitor, and my husband as well, he said, "Oh, you're speaking to Hugh. You must say thank you for the work you've done so far in terms of, us oldies, not having to do a medical every year is fantastic. So yeah, big up for that. Thank you very much."
It was one of those things that just seemed an anomaly. And we're gradually working through all these things that nobody had ever really sort of questioned and challenged. And clearly we needed to go through medical committee and safety committee, and everybody needed to think about it very carefully. And once it had come back and everybody felt comfortable, it was like, great, let's just get rid of this bit of red tape.
Yeah, it's brilliant. And it makes it cheaper, and it's all those things. It's great. So
very good.
I wanted to ask you a few questions. One of which is, obviously, we're allowed to go racing again from the 29th of March. And just to give you a chance to say what exactly has been going on behind the scenes in the run up to that release to race.
Well, I think probably the most important thing has been a lot of lobbying with government, and our government department that deals with us is the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport, the DCMS, and we've built a very close relationship with them over the last 12 months. And I think what they've seen is that motorsport is extremely well organized. Safety is at the very heart of everything that we do for obvious reasons. And it means that we've got a community that when we issue guidelines and we develop protocols, they're incredibly good at following them. And I think what they've gained from that is a great deal of comfort that we can conduct motorsport even with quite large numbers of people. I mean, a football match, you can go out there and you can, with a few dozen people with some hangers on, you've got a fairly small number of people. But it's certainly, if you want to go circuit racing, you're rapidly into hundreds of people just in order for the event to actually take place. So they had to get comfortable with the scale of what we do, but also combined together with the fact we're usually competing in a very large open air space. That has certainly made it a little bit easier. So dealing with government has been crucial. I think the development of very clear guidelines that we could provide to the community, which we started last year when motorsport actually closed down nearly 365 days ago. It's the 12th of March today. It was the 17th of March last year that we unfortunately put a halt on all proceedings. We restarted again in July. And we had, thankfully, a pretty good summer, and things really ran right through until November, as you know. So we've had experience of going into lockdown, coming out of lockdown, how to manage things, working with all the different home nations, because it's not just DCMS who deal with England, but obviously Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and the devolved governments that we have to deal with. So it's that liaison, the liaison with the community, working with our different committees so that they can be comfortable with the protocols that we're developing, working with the FIA, clearly Appendix S, which some people may be aware of, is really for the high-level international series and has some very demanding requirements on the competitors and the teams. And we fought fairly hard to have some relaxations around that for the historic community, for example, who are finding that the testing protocols that were expected of Appendix S when applied to historic motorsport when we travel overseas were too demanding. So lots of different stakeholder groups, lots of negotiation, lots of persuading people as to how we should be able to operate. And then I think just the execution of it has really been the key thing, and making sure that there's a proper forum where people can voice their concerns, that we get the feedback, and that we then are able to run webinars to train people into the way of doing these things. So a great deal has gone on behind the scenes.
It sounds a huge amount. Yeah. So are we going to be allowed to have the social events such as Silverstone Classic? And what does it actually take for the Motorsport UK to revoke a licence?
Withdrawing a license is something that we do very reluctantly. It's clearly in everybody's interest that we manage to keep motorsport going absolutely as much as we can. The line in the sand, or I would say probably the solid brick wall, is government legislation. We have to adhere, obviously, to everything that the government lays down, but there are inevitably certain areas that are a little bit more grey than black and white when it comes to legislation. In dealing with the pandemic, the government is developing new legislation the whole time, and it's often legislation which is aimed at one part of society that then has an impact on another part of society. So, as mentioned before, talking with DCMS, how do we figure out how this actually works in practice when it comes, first of all, to sport in general, but then also specifically to motorsport? So what we're always doing is fighting the corner for motorsport to be able to continue, but at the same time bearing in mind the reputational elements of motorsport being conducted in a situation in society where lots of other activities can't go on, and whether it's appropriate. So go back to your original question, what does it take for us to withdraw a permit? We can withdraw a permit without any notice if the government legislation changes and it requires us to do so. But similarly, we can also issue permits at will. It's in our gift. And as the official governing body for motorsport in this country, we're uniquely positioned to be able to issue those permits for four-wheel motorsport.
And so, what about the sort of social side? I.e., Silverstone Classic is about getting people together. Is that going to go ahead as we know it, or is it going to be different?
Again, it's entirely down to government legislation as to the size of crowds that are going to be allowed to congregate. The indications at the moment, and I think the government's been very clear on this, is that the unlocking of society will be no earlier than the 21st of June. So they've kept themselves or given themselves the ability to extend it beyond that. I think we all know that the general direction of travel at the moment with the vaccinations and the lockdown is pretty positive. So we seem to be on track for meeting these specific deadlines or gateways, if you like, of timing. And as we're here, as I say, in the middle of March, April, May and June, 3 months away, it doesn't seem unrealistic as we're here now that things will have unlocked by the middle of June.
It definitely feels like things are improving, for sure. So I want to touch on the elite sport exemption rule, which actually was a brilliant idea by the government to allow us to travel to competition during lockdown, but only as long as the event was run by an international body. So great rule, but obviously it left a huge amount of historic events out of the, just outside the door. Do you think things will change going forward?
At the moment, I think if anything, things have got tighter. I think that as we've, if I had to sort of read between the lines of government strategy, I'd say that they want this lockdown to be firm and effective and to ensure that we don't have to come back here. And therefore, if you take, for example, the red list countries, they are immovable on the requirement for travellers from red list countries to quarantine in hotels. Even if you're an elite athlete, there is no exemption for that, for example. In terms of traveling overseas or having a justified reason to travel overseas, then being an elite athlete, which we define as an officially recognized international competition on the FIA calendar, is something that they were comfortable with doing. And I think that's probably, in many ways, it's a greater liberty than a lot of other sports have been able to achieve. Particularly those that are on the Olympic pathway. The Olympic environment or Olympic sports environment has a much more tightly defined definition of elite athlete, and probably because that term has not really been used in motorsport before this situation. It's allowed us that bit of negotiation, I think, with the government to find a suitable parameter, and given the FIA is the international federation, an international event that sits on their calendar is something that they felt was a justifiable definition.
Well, I did an interview with the HGPCA a couple of days ago, and they are pretty keen about being elite. And if you've seen the average age of them, they're mostly retired sort of athletes, shall we say.
but you have Masters Championships. If you do triathlons, you can actually race for Great Britain in your 60s. They have age group competitions in triathlons. So it's another question. Probably bowling, lawn bowls.
Oh, right. I was going to touch on the Brexit. We've spoken to a lot of the race organisers. We've spoken about carnets and the difficulty, perhaps the hurdles people are going to stop entering races in Europe. But lots of them seem to think that common sense will prevail and things will calm down. And I guess that's not really going to happen unless someone, we have to renegotiate, the government renegotiates with the EU. And I guess what we need is a governing body who is fighting our corner a bit there. So can you tell us what's going on behind the scenes?
Well, we're definitely fighting the corner. The reality is that, motorsport is but one tiny little tile in the huge jigsaw puzzle of international trade and movements. And, I think I saw the headline this morning in the newspaper that exports from Europe, or was it to Europe, were down 41% in January. This is a process that is being worked out in real time. That whilst the government and the EU reached an agreement in time for the deadline so they could announce that it was all legal and it was completed, none of the detail, I think, was filled in between. And that is an ongoing piece of work. We're working with the Birmingham Chamber of Commerce on a carnet system, and so we have established a reduced price for it, which is good news. And we're working with our insurers as well to see if there's any way in which we can mitigate some of the costs associated with it. So we continue to work on this area, but it's rather like I mentioned before, government legislation takes huge swathes of society and industry and our freedoms with it whenever it's enacted, and you then have to try and carve out exceptions to the rule in the way that we can operate. But I think there's going to be a bit of short-term pain, but I'm sure that before too long, the system will have been worked into something very smooth and very efficient. It's not in anybody's interest, either the EU's or Britain's, to have a sticky system or something with lots of friction in it.
No, I totally agree. But how long do you think it'll take? A year, maybe, or?
I think it would be impossible to answer that with any degree of real accuracy. But I think, if you were guessing, you'd say that it's going to gradually improve through the rest of this year. So I would hope that by 2022, things have really ironed out and are running very smoothly. But the systems are in place now. I mean, you can move equipment between the UK and Europe. It's just there's a few wrinkles along the way.
Yeah, no, this is true. Nothing is impossible. So our friends at Hero did a wonderful report which they released in December on the value of historic motorsport, telling us that the racing industry is some £370 million worth. I just wondered, has that changed the Motorsport UK's view on historic motorsport, or how do you look at us?
Oh, I don't think it's changed it, because we held historic motorsport in the highest esteem beforehand. So I suppose it's further endorsed it and reinforced our position. Motorsport UK in its former iteration, the MSA, has a long history of embracing historic motorsport in the UK. HTPs, historic technical passports for cars, the FIA passports. The UK issues around about 50% of all of the HTPs worldwide. And that gives you some sort of measure of just how big the historic motorsport industry is in this country and how important it is. And, the return to racing last summer and the return to racing in a few weeks' time, leading the charge is historic motorsport. I saw the L'Equipe series just put out an announcement that their event in Brands Hatch in the middle of next month or beginning of May is completely sold out, and they're putting on a second grid. There's a sweet spot in there, isn't there, where for historic motorsport, it's people who've got certainly the passion, they've got wonderful equipment that they want to use, and they've probably got the wherewithal to be able to get out there and use it. You know, they're probably, I think, as you alluded to, you know, at a certain stage in life where perhaps, you know, now that they can really indulge themselves in their hobby.
Yeah, well, that's great to hear. Well, thank you very much. And well, maybe we can encourage you to come along and visit one.
Absolutely.
Too.
Absolutely. No, I'm passionate about it. I mean, as you we were talking before, you know, obviously with my family background going back to the 1950s, well, before the war even, my father won his class at Le Mans in an HRG in 1939. So, you know, I've grown up with motorsport all my life, so I'm passionate about every era of motorsport, from the modern going all the way back to the pre-dawn of motorsport.
All right, well, thank you very much for your time, Hugh, and yeah, we look forward to seeing you out there.
Fantastic. Great pleasure, and thank you very much indeed.